Have you ever made a snap decision only to regret it moments later? Or trusted your gut instinct, convinced it was right, until logic proved you wrong? What if your brain is tricking you more often than you think? Welcome to Thinking Fast and Slow, a groundbreaking journey into the two minds that live within us. One that reacts instantly, and another that thinks carefully. In this audiobook summary, we'll uncover the psychological traps that secretly guide your choices, distort your memories, and shape your reality, without you even noticing. By the end, you'll never look at your own thoughts the same way again. Let's dive in. Chapter 1: The Two Systems of the Mind. Welcome to the mind's invisible battlefield, where two very different systems are constantly shaping how you see, think, and decide. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, introduces us to the foundation of human thought, System 1 and System 2. These are not actual regions in your brain, but metaphors for how we process information. Imagine walking into a room and instantly recognizing a friend's face. You didn't think. Your mind just knew. That's System 1 in action. Fast, automatic, emotional, and subconscious. Now imagine being handed a piece of paper and asked to multiply 23 by 47. Your brow furrows. You pause. You focus. That's System 2. Slow, effortful, deliberate, and logical. Kahneman's central thesis is simple, yet powerful. We believe we are rational creatures, but most of our decisions are made without thinking at all. Meet System 1, the intuitive machine. System 1 is ancient, efficient, and always on. It handles detecting a hostile tone in someone's voice, driving a car on an empty road, understanding simple sentences, completing phrases like bread and. It operates automatically and quickly, with little or no effort. It's your gut instinct, your first impression, your intuition. But System 1 isn't just helpful. It's also reckless. It jumps to conclusions. It makes snap judgments. It creates a coherent story out of incomplete information. It's great for survival, but not always for truth. Now enter System 2, the rational supervisor. System 2 is slower and more logical. It kicks in when you try to park in a tight spot, fill out a tax form, compare two smartphones based on specs, question a stereotype. System 2 is your inner critic. It questions, calculates, and scrutinizes. But there's a catch. It's lazy. It would rather defer to System 1 unless absolutely necessary. In Kahneman's words, System 2 is the supporting character who believes herself to be the hero. The illusion of control. Here's the twist. We think we're using System 2 most of the time. But in reality, System 1 is steering the ship, and System 2 is just giving post-rationalizations. We trust our instincts, even when they're flawed. This leads to a dangerous cognitive trap. We mistake confidence for accuracy. Let's say you meet someone in a suit and tie. Instantly, System 1 might label him successful or trustworthy. You haven't seen his resume or background, just a suit. And yet, you feel sure. That's called Wysiati. What you see is all there is. System 1 uses the information at hand and fills in the blanks. But often, the blanks are where the truth lies. The tug of war. Think of your mind like a company. System 1 is the quick, instinctual intern, decisive, fast, and confident. System 2 is the overworked manager, capable, smart, but tired. When pressure builds, the manager often lets the intern take over. And when that happens, biases creep in. Why this matters? Kahneman isn't just describing brain quirks. He's revealing the hidden forces behind bad decisions, failed businesses, and even political disasters. Every time you jump to a conclusion, rely on your gut, assume without evidence. You're likely letting System 1 dominate. But by recognizing the difference, by learning to pause, you begin to train your System 2. You begin to think about your thinking. This is the first and most vital step in mastering judgment. Know which system is in charge. Chapter 2. The Lazy Controller. When System 2 fails you, now that we've met the two systems of thought, it's time to go deeper. In theory, System 2, the rational, deliberate, analytical thinker, should be the captain of your mental ship. But in reality, it often takes a back seat. Why? Because System 2 is lazy by design. It's not a flaw. It's an evolutionary adaptation. Thinking deeply burns calories, consumes mental energy, and takes time. So, unless absolutely required, your brain avoids it. It prefers quick, automatic answers. That's why System 1 is your brain's default. But here's the danger. When System 2 gets lazy, System 1 makes the decisions. And System 1 is brilliant, but blind. Cognitive ease. The comfort trap. Kahneman introduces us to a powerful idea, cognitive ease. This is the feeling of effortlessness. When something feels easy to process, our brains trust it more. Simple font? Must be true. Rhyming slogan? Must be wise. Familiar phrase? Must be right. It's why marketers use catchy jingles. It's why political slogans are short and snappy. It's why we trust what we've heard before, even when it's wrong. This ease creates a false sense of confidence. Our brain thinks, this feels right, and System 2 steps aside. The bias of belief. Let's say you read this sentence. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Most people quickly answer, 10 cents. Sounds right, feels right, and it's wrong. Because if the ball is 10 cents, the bat is $1.10, which adds to $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. But System 1 jumps in with what feels right, and System 2 often doesn't bother to check. This is what Kahneman calls a lazy controller. This isn't just a math problem, it's a metaphor. We all make decisions in life, business, relationships, and finance that feel instinctively right, but are logically flawed. The law of least effort. System 2 has limited fuel. It tires quickly. Studies show that even small things, like skipping breakfast or resisting temptation, can drain it. In one experiment, participants asked to remember a 7-digit number were more likely to choose chocolate cake over fruit. Why? Their mental resources were drained. System 2 was tired. So System 1 took over and said, cake sounds good. That's the law of least effort in action. Your brain wants to conserve energy. It avoids complex thinking unless it absolutely must. This has real consequences. Tired judges give harsher sentences. Busy doctors misdiagnose. Stressed investors make impulsive trades. Priming. You are more suggestible than you think. Kahneman also reveals the astonishing power of priming. How subtle cues shape behavior. In one study, people who read words associated with old age, like Florida, gray, and wrinkle, actually walked more slowly afterwards. Another study showed that students asked to solve puzzles in a messy room performed worse than those in a clean one. System 1 is constantly picking up clues from the environment without your awareness and altering your behavior. System 2 could override these effects, but only if it's awake and paying attention. The illusion of attention. Perhaps the most famous demonstration of System 2's limits is the invisible gorilla experiment. Participants were asked to count basketball passes in a video. Most were so focused, they completely missed a person in a gorilla suit walking through the scene. This is inattentional blindness, proof that System 2 can focus deeply, but at the cost of missing everything else. We often think we're aware and observant, but Kahneman shows we're not just blind to what's around us, we're blind to our blindness. The takeaway. System 2 is capable of amazing feats. It's responsible for science, logic, art, planning, and self-control. But it's slow, energy-intensive, and often distracted. System 1 is fast and efficient, but also impulsive, biased, and frequently wrong. The key insight? Your brain runs on shortcuts, and the controller you trust the most, your reasoning mind, is often asleep at the wheel. Understanding the lazy controller within you is not about blame, it's about awareness. Because once you realize how often System 1 makes the call, you can start to train System 2 to wake up. And that's the first step toward mastering your decisions. Chapter 3. The Mind's Shortcuts. Heuristics and Biases. We live in a world that bombards us with decisions, hundreds every day, big and small. Which route to take to work? Should I trust this new coworker? Is this product worth the price? Our brain, ever efficient, can't afford to calculate everything from scratch, so it relies on shortcuts. These shortcuts are called heuristics, mental rules of thumb. They're quick, automatic, and often helpful, but they come with a price: bias. In this chapter, Kahneman introduces us to the most influential contribution of his work with Amos Tversky, uncovering the hidden flaws in our thinking caused by these mental shortcuts. Let's explore the key heuristics that shape your everyday decisions, often without your permission. The substitution trick. Imagine you're asked a complex question. Should I invest in this startup? It's hard. There's uncertainty, risk, incomplete data. But your brain, especially System 1, doesn't like hard problems, so it substitutes an easier one. Do I like the founder? Or, does this feel exciting? You don't even notice the switch. That's the trick. And it's called attribute substitution, a cornerstone of heuristic thinking. The result? You feel confident in your answer, even though you never answered the original question. The availability heuristic. What comes to mind feels true. If you're asked, are plane crashes more common than car accidents? You might say yes. Why? Because you remember dramatic news footage of plane crashes? They're vivid, emotional, and easy to recall. That's the availability heuristic, judging the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. This leads to distortions in how we perceive risk. We overestimate the danger of terrorism, but underestimate heart disease. We fear shark attacks, but not swimming pools. We focus on rare tragedies and ignore silent killers. What's available in your memory is not necessarily representative of reality. The representativeness, heuristic, stereotypes in action. Meet Tom. He's quiet, enjoys chess, and wears glasses. Is he more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? Most people say librarian because Tom matches the stereotype. But here's the problem. There are far more farmers than librarians. Statistically, Tom is more likely to be a farmer. This is the representativeness heuristic, judging probabilities based on how much something resembles a category rather than on actual data. It leads us to ignore base rates, the real statistical background of a situation. We stereotype people, events, and outcomes because it's easier than analyzing probability. But the truth often lies in the base rates, not in the story our mind spins. Anchoring. The first number sets the stage. What if I asked, is the Mississippi River longer or shorter than 500 miles? Then I ask, how long is it exactly? Even though you don't know the answer, your estimate will be influenced by that first number, 500. That's anchoring in action. This is why retailers show the original price before a discount. That first number, whether relevant or not, becomes the mental anchor, pulling your judgment toward it. Anchoring is powerful. Even irrelevant numbers can shape our decisions, often without us realizing it. The effect heuristic. When feelings override facts. Think of nuclear energy. Do you see it as dangerous or useful? Chances are you already have a gut reaction. If you feel it's dangerous, you'll also think the risks are high and the benefits low. If you feel positive about it, you downplay the risks. That's the affect heuristic, where emotion dominates logic. Instead of analyzing facts, we base decisions on our emotional reactions. This is how political ads, marketing, and propaganda work. They stir feelings. Knowing feelings drive beliefs. The danger of confidence. Heuristics create an illusion, not just of simplicity but of certainty. When we use them, we often feel confident. But as Kahneman warns, confidence is not a measure of accuracy. It's a feeling, often generated by System 1's quick answers. The more fluent and easy something feels, the more true it seems. And that's where bad decisions are born. The takeaway. Heuristics help us survive. They're shortcuts built from evolution. But in a complex world, they're unreliable guides. Kahneman's lesson here is clear. Be skeptical of easy answers. Pause before you trust your gut. Check the data. Question the first number. Recognize when you're substituting a hard question for an easy one. Your mind's shortcuts are fast, but fast doesn't mean right. And until you understand the biases behind your thoughts, you're not making decisions. You're reacting to illusions. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Understanding Hindsight, Narrative, and the Myth of Prediction. Human beings crave meaning. We want the world to make sense, so we tell stories. Stories about our past, about success and failure, about why things happened the way they did. But Kahneman exposes a tough truth. Much of what we think we understand is an illusion. And the stories we tell ourselves about our lives, our choices, our history, are often deeply flawed. Let's unpack how your mind fools you into thinking you understand what you don't. Hindsight. Bias. I knew it all along. Ever hear someone say, I knew that stock would crash? Or, I always had a feeling that couple wouldn't last? Chances are they're lying, but not on purpose. That's hindsight bias in action. After something happens, your brain reconstructs the past to make it seem predictable. It deletes uncertainty. It smooths out chaos. It pretends the signs were obvious. In reality, they weren't. This is why we overestimate our foresight and underestimate the role of chance. It's comforting to believe the world is orderly, but that belief can blind us to reality. Lesson. Just because something seems obvious now doesn't mean it was obvious before it happened. The narrative fallacy, the danger of stories. Humans are storytelling creatures. We need cause and effect, hero and villain, beginning and end. But life is rarely so neat. We create narratives to explain success. He became a billionaire because he's a genius. She failed because she made poor decisions. But these stories ignore luck, randomness, timing, and the complex web of factors that shape every outcome. Kahneman calls this the narrative fallacy. Our tendency to oversimplify events into neat, logical explanations. We see patterns where none exist. We prefer a bad story over no story. And worst of all, we believe them. Outcome bias, judging decisions by results. Imagine a doctor makes a risky decision to operate. The patient dies. We call it a mistake. But if the patient survives, we call it courage. That's outcome bias, the tendency to judge decisions based on their results, not their quality. It ignores that good decisions can have bad outcomes and bad decisions can sometimes get lucky. This bias affects leaders, investors, parents, and judges. We reward outcomes, not reasoning. And in doing so, we create a culture where luck gets mistaken for skill. The illusion of validity. Confident, but wrong. Have you ever met someone who speaks with absolute confidence, even when they're clearly wrong? That's not a personality flaw. It's a feature of how our minds work. System 1, the fast-thinking part of your brain, is designed to be coherent. It wants things to fit together. And when a story feels right, it feels true, even if it's completely false. Kahneman tells the story of army recruiters who confidently judged leadership potential in soldiers within minutes. Years later, there was no correlation between those early assessments and actual leadership performance. But the recruiters never stopped trusting their intuition. The illusion of validity is especially dangerous in fields like finance, business, and politics, where confident predictions are made without real predictive power. The problem with experts. One of the most surprising findings in Kahneman's research is that experts are often no better than chance when predicting outcomes in complex, uncertain environments. In a 20-year study of economic and political forecasts, experts did slightly worse than dart-throwing monkeys. Yet, they remained extremely confident in their abilities. Why? Because they mistook coherent stories for reality. They saw patterns in randomness. They believed their own narratives. This isn't just humbling, it's terrifying, because the world often rewards confidence, not accuracy. The takeaway. Kahneman's message in this chapter is a psychological gut punch. You don't understand the past as well as you think. Your predictions about the future are less reliable than you believe. And the stories you tell yourself about success, failure, love, and luck are comforting fictions stitched together after the fact. The solution isn't to stop telling stories. It's to be aware that you're doing it, and to question them. Success doesn't always mean skill. Failure doesn't always mean fault. And your memories of how it happened are often edited, biased, and backward engineered. True wisdom begins when you admit, I don't know as much as I think I do. Chapter 5. Overconfidence. The engine of illusion. We love certainty. We admire bold predictions. We trust people who speak with confidence. But Kahneman warns, confidence is often a trap. In this chapter, he unveils one of the most persistent and dangerous cognitive illusions, the illusion that we understand and can predict far more than we actually can. Welcome to the world of overconfidence, where ignorance feels like knowledge and humility is rare. What you see is all there is. Wysiati. Imagine you're solving a puzzle, but you're only given half the pieces. Rather than waiting to find the rest, your brain fills in the blanks, automatically, confidently, and often wrongly. That's Wysiati. What you see is all there is. This principle is at the heart of overconfidence. System 1 jumps to conclusions based on limited information and doesn't stop to ask, what am I missing? You see a smart person with a good resume and assume they'll be a great CEO. You hear a politician give a powerful speech and assume they'll be a great leader. You base your judgment on what's visible, without questioning what's hidden. Wysiati fuels intuition, narratives, and premature certainty, and it's everywhere. The planning fallacy. Why we always underestimate. Kahneman shares a story from his own life. Designing a new curriculum, his team estimated the project would take 2 years. It took 8. This is the planning fallacy. Our deep tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take, how much they'll cost, and how hard they'll be. Why does this happen? Because we focus on our specific plan and forget to ask, what usually happens in situations like this? The antidote? Use the outside view. Look at the base rates, how similar projects went, not just at your unique vision. The planning fallacy costs billions in business, government, and personal goals, but it can be corrected with realism, humility, and historical perspective. The engine of bold predictions. Here's how bold, and often wrong, predictions are made. We spot a pattern or trend. We build a story around it. We ignore uncertainty. We overvalue our information. We declare our prediction with confidence. This process gives rise to pundits, analysts, and advisors who sound sure, but whose actual track record is poor. The scariest part? The more coherent the story, the more confident we feel, even if the facts don't support it. Kahneman reminds us, the confidence people have in their beliefs is not a measure of the accuracy of those beliefs. Intuition versus expertise. Is intuition ever trustworthy? Sometimes, but only in specific conditions. When the environment is stable and predictable. When there's enough experience and feedback. For example, a firefighter sensing a collapsing building? Yes. A chess grandmaster recognizing a pattern? Yes. A stock trader predicting market swings? Not so fast. In unpredictable environments, intuition is unreliable. It feels right, but it's often wrong. So Kahneman makes a critical distinction. Skilled intuition is real, but it must be earned, tested, and confined to the right domains. The halo effect. One trait rules them all. Imagine meeting someone charismatic and articulate. You instantly assume they're smart, competent, even moral. That's the halo effect, our tendency to let one positive trait inflate our judgment of everything else. It also works in reverse. If someone seems rude, we assume they're unintelligent or dishonest. This bias affects hiring, relationships, politics, and everyday life. It's another way Wysiati fools us, by turning part of the picture into the whole. The takeaway. Confidence sells. It persuades, influences, and dominates boardrooms and elections. But as Kahneman shows, confidence is often unrelated to truth. It is a feeling, not a fact. Here's what to remember. Don't trust confident people blindly. Ask for their track record. Don't mistake strong opinions for strong evidence. Don't rely on intuition in uncertain, unpredictable fields. Always ask, what am I not seeing? What's the base rate? Am I falling for the halo effect? Humility is not weakness, it's wisdom. And in a world drowning in confident claims, skepticism is survival. The truth is, the world is more complex, more random, and more unknowable than we care to admit. But recognizing that is the beginning of good judgment. Chapter 6. Risk, Loss, and the Psychology of Choices. Imagine this. You're offered two options. Option A, a guaranteed $900. Option B, a 90% chance to win $1,000 and a 10% chance to win nothing. Which would you choose? Now consider another version. Option A, a guaranteed loss of $900. Option B, a 90% chance to lose $1,000 and a 10% chance to lose nothing. Notice how your feelings change? This is where we dive into one of Kahneman's most groundbreaking insights. Prospect theory, a revolution in how we understand decision-making under risk. The birth of prospect theory. Traditional economics assumed humans were rational agents, making decisions based on logic, maximizing utility. But Kahneman and his partner Amos Tversky shattered that illusion. They discovered we don't make decisions in a vacuum. Instead, we hate losses more than we enjoy gains, react differently to the same information depending on how it's framed, and take irrational risks just to avoid regret or pain. These findings form the core of prospect theory, which explains why people often behave in ways that defy logic, but follow predictable psychological patterns. Loss aversion, pain hurts. More than pleasure feels good. Here's the key principle. Losses loom larger than gains. Losing $100 feels more painful than the pleasure of gaining $100 feels good. In fact, the pain of loss is psychologically about twice as powerful as the joy of gain. This explains why people hold on to losing stocks too long, why we avoid risk when facing potential gains, but embrace risk to avoid certain losses, why we overinsure against small risks. Loss aversion is deeply embedded in our psychology. It keeps us cautious, but also holds us back. The certainty effect. When 100% feels magical, would you prefer a 100% chance to win $900 or a 95% chance to win $1,000? Most people choose the sure thing, even though the expected value is higher in the second option. That's the certainty effect. We overweight outcomes that are guaranteed and underweight probabilities, especially when risk is involved. We crave certainty, even when it's irrational. Framing matters more than you think. Here's a classic example. Doctors were asked to choose between two treatments for a disease. One was framed as saving 200 out of 600 lives. The other was framed as letting 400 out of 600 people die. Same numbers. Different wording. Totally different choices. People are far more likely to choose an option when it's framed positively, even if the actual outcome is identical. This shows how context, not just content, shapes decisions. The fourfold pattern of risk. Kahneman identifies 4 key patterns in how we evaluate risk. High probability. Gain. We prefer the sure gain. Risk averse. High probability. Loss. We take a risk to avoid a certain loss. Risk seeking. Low probability. Gain. We gamble for a small chance at a big win, like lotteries. Low probability. Loss. We overinsure and fear rare disasters. This matrix reveals just how inconsistent human behavior is, and why traditional models of rational choice don't hold up. The endowment effect. Ownership changes value. When you own something, you value it more, just because it's yours. People who are given a mug in a study won't sell it for less than $5, but people who don't own the mug won't pay more than $2 for it. This endowment effect shows how ownership triggers loss aversion, making us overvalue what we have and resist giving it up. The takeaway. This chapter unveils a psychological truth that touches every decision we make, from finances to relationships. We are not rational calculators. We are emotional creatures shaped by fear, framing, and the need for certainty. Here's what to remember. Losses feel twice as painful as gains feel good. The way choices are framed changes our decisions. We crave certainty, even when it's irrational. We often fear small losses more than we desire big wins. What we own, we overvalue. Kahneman's research doesn't just explain human behavior, it helps us master it. Because when we become aware of our biases, we can pause, reflect, and choose more wisely. The best decisions aren't made by avoiding risk, but by understanding how risk feels and how it tricks our minds. Chapter 7. Choices, Happiness, and the Illusion of Reality. We make decisions every day, assuming we know what will make us happy. But what if our inner storyteller is misleading us? What if the voice inside our head is chasing an illusion? In this chapter, Daniel Kahneman introduces one of his most profound insights. The two selves within us, the experiencing self and the remembering self. And they don't always agree. The two selves, experience versus memory. Kahneman distinguishes between the experiencing self, the part of you that lives in the present moment, feeling life as it unfolds. The remembering self, the storyteller in your head, the one that reviews and judges your past. Here's the twist. We make decisions based on what we remember, not what we actually experienced. Imagine a vacation. Your trip was mostly peaceful, but the last day was stressful. Your memory might label the whole trip as bad, despite most of it being good. The remembering self dominates decision-making, even if it distorts reality. The peak end rule. Our memories aren't fair. We don't remember every moment equally. Instead, we remember the peak moments, the most intense, pleasant or unpleasant, the ending, how the experience concluded. This is called the peak end rule, and it shapes how we evaluate everything, from vacations to medical procedures to relationships. It explains why a painful colonoscopy that ends mildly is remembered better than a shorter, equally painful one that ends abruptly. We stay in toxic jobs or relationships if they end on a good note. Marketers focus on delivering a powerful climax and a smooth finish. The remembering self values narratives, not durations. Duration neglect. How long something lasts barely matters to how we remember it. A 10-minute pleasant massage feels just as good in memory as a 30-minute one, if both end the same way. This cognitive blind spot is known as duration neglect. We're wired to judge experiences based on highlights and endings, not time. And that has consequences. It affects how we design experiences, events, even our lives, favoring memorable stories over moment-to-moment well-being. The happiness illusion. So, what really makes us happy? Kahneman challenges our assumptions with research showing that money improves life satisfaction, but only up to a point. Beyond basic comfort, more money has little effect on the experiencing self. Yet we continue to chase money, because our remembering self wants a better story. We don't seek happiness. We seek a life we can look back on proudly. That's why people choose prestigious jobs over joyful ones. It's why we climb mountains. We don't enjoy climbing. It's why we endure discomfort for the sake of achievement. We're not living for the moment. We're living for memories. The focusing illusion. Kahneman reveals another powerful bias, the focusing illusion. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. When we focus on something, wealth, success, a new car, it seems like the key to happiness. But once we have it, it fades into the background. We overestimate the impact of moving to a better city, getting a raise, losing weight, gaining status. These things matter, but not as much as we believe while obsessing over them. Designing a life for the right self. So which self should we serve? The experiencing self wants peace, flow, pleasure, and meaning now. The remembering self wants stories, accomplishments, and significance. Kahneman doesn't say one is better, but he reminds us they want different things. A good life may not always feel good while you're living it. And a life that feels good may not impress your remembering self. The key is balance. Create meaningful moments and satisfying endings. Don't let your memory hijack your present. Seek joy in the process, not just the outcome. The takeaway. This chapter isn't just about psychology. It's about how we live. Here's what to remember. You have two selves, and they don't always agree. The remembering self makes decisions, but the experiencing self lives with them. We judge events by the peak and the end, not the full story. Money, status, and success don't guarantee happiness. They just improve your story. The present moment matters more than we let it. Kahneman urges us to reflect. Are we living for the memory, or are we living for the moment? And more importantly, what kind of happiness are we really chasing? Chapter 8. Risk, Loss, and the Power of Prospect Theory. We think we're rational when making decisions under risk. But most of us don't act like mathematicians. We act like emotional creatures trying to avoid pain. In this chapter, Daniel Kahneman introduces one of his most revolutionary ideas, prospect theory, for which he won the Nobel Prize. It forever changed how we understand decision-making under uncertainty. The problem with expected utility. For decades, economists believed people made decisions by calculating expected utility, the mathematical value of a gamble. For example, if you have a 50% chance to win $100, the expected utility is $50. But real people don't think this way. We don't treat gains and losses equally. We react much more strongly to losses than to gains. This is where Kahneman and Tversky broke new ground. The core of prospect theory. Prospect theory describes how people really make decisions in uncertain situations. It reveals 3 psychological truths. Losses hurt more than gains feel good. This is called loss aversion. Losing $100 is more painful than the joy of gaining $100. People evaluate outcomes as gains or losses, not final states. We don't think in absolutes. We think in changes from a reference point. We overweight small probabilities and underweight large ones. That's why we fear rare disasters, plane crashes, and why we play the lottery. These ideas explain behavior that traditional economics can't. Loss aversion, the king of irrationality. Loss aversion is perhaps the most powerful insight from Kahneman's work. Imagine this simple choice. Option A, win $900 for sure. Option B, 90% chance to win $1,000, 10% chance to win nothing. Most people choose option A. They avoid the risk, even if the expected value is higher in option B. Now flip the scenario. Option C, lose $900 for sure. Option D, 90% chance to lose $1,000, 10% chance to lose nothing. Now most people pick option D, willing to gamble to avoid the pain of a certain loss. We're risk-averse with gains, but risk-seeking with losses. This asymmetry is the essence of loss aversion. We hate losing more than we enjoy winning. The endowment effect. Loss aversion also explains the endowment effect. People value things more just because they own them. If you're given a mug, you'll demand more money to give it up than you'd be willing to pay for it if you didn't own it. Why? Because giving it up feels like a loss, and that hurts more. This insight reshaped how businesses design products, how negotiators frame deals, and how people invest. Framing effects. It's all in the presentation. The same choice, framed differently, leads to different decisions. Example, frame A, gain. This surgery has a 90% survival rate. Frame B, loss. This surgery has a 10% mortality rate. Mathematically identical. Psychologically, worlds apart. People prefer frame A. Why? Because it emphasizes gain, not loss. Framing affects everything. How policies are accepted, how investors react, how people make health decisions. We are not reacting to reality. We're reacting to how reality is described. Why we buy lotteries and insurance. Prospect theory explains both. We buy lottery tickets, overweighting the small chance of a big win. We buy insurance, overweighting the small chance of disaster. We don't calculate expected value. We respond to stories, emotions, and imagined outcomes. Practical implications. Prospect theory has real-world power. In marketing, Highlight what people stand to lose if they don't buy. Loss framing works better than gain framing. In negotiation, frame your concessions as losses averted for the other party. In personal finance, be aware of your biases. Loss aversion can lead to holding on to losing stocks too long, avoiding smart risks, making emotional investment decisions. In policy design, people support opt-out systems more than opt-in, for example, organ donation, because opting out feels like a loss. The takeaway: prospect theory shattered the illusion of rational decision-making. Here's what to remember. We fear losses more than we crave gains. We don't evaluate absolute outcomes. We judge from a reference point. We overweight unlikely outcomes and underreact to the likely ones. Framing changes everything. Human decisions are emotional, not just logical. Kahneman's insight is clear. We are not calculators. We are storytellers, risk avoiders, and loss haters. And until we understand our biases, we'll be ruled by them. Chapter 9. The Fundamental Attribution Error and the Power of Context. Have you ever misjudged someone's behavior based on what you think about them? Or assumed their actions were due to their personality, not the situation they were in? In this chapter, Kahneman explores how we misunderstand human behavior and overemphasize the role of personal traits, while ignoring the power of context. The fundamental attribution error. We all make this mistake, consciously or unconsciously. It's called the fundamental attribution error. When observing others, we tend to attribute their actions to their personality rather than the situation they're in. For example, if someone cuts you off in traffic, you may think they are rude or reckless. But what if they're rushing to the hospital for an emergency? We ignore the context and instead, we blame the person. We also make this error when judging ourselves, but in reverse. If we cut someone off in traffic, we are more likely to explain it by saying, "I was late," or "I had a good reason," rather than admitting it was simply a reckless action. The power of context. Kahneman goes deeper to show how much context shapes our behavior. It's not just about personality or character, it's about the environment and situation we're in. Studies have shown that context can change behavior in profound ways. Take, for example, an experiment where people were asked to observe an individual's actions. The same person performed differently depending on the environment, whether in a stressful situation, an authoritative setting, or when they felt anonymous. This highlights a powerful truth. We are not just who we think we are. We are deeply shaped by the contexts we inhabit, often in ways we don't even realize. The importance of situational awareness. People behave based on the situation, not always their character. The situation can range from physical environment, the weather, room temperature, or presence of others. Social environment, whether they feel judged, supported, or overlooked. Mental state, fatigue, hunger, or stress. The next time you judge someone, consider whether the context might explain their actions better than their personality. The prisoner's dilemma. A classic experiment. Kahneman discusses the famous prisoner's dilemma to further illustrate how context impacts decisions. In this scenario, two criminals are given a choice: betray each other for a reduced sentence or stay silent. If both stay silent, they get a moderate sentence. If one betrays the other, the betrayer goes free, while the other gets a heavy sentence. If both betray, they both get harsh sentences. When people are asked to play this game in controlled settings, they often betray each other, even though cooperating would be in their mutual interest. Why? Because of the fear of betrayal, trust issues, and the pressure of immediate consequences. The prisoner's dilemma demonstrates how context, like fear of punishment or distrust of others, drives seemingly irrational choices. Overcoming the fundamental attribution error. To break free from this bias, we need to pause and reflect on the broader context when judging others' actions. Instead of assuming it's their character, we must ask, what's their situation? What factors might be influencing their behavior? Could I have acted the same way in their shoes? This requires mental effort and deliberate thinking, something that Kahneman's system 2, the slower, more rational system, can help us with. By doing so, we improve our empathy and avoid the pitfalls of snap judgments. The bias of we versus they. Another related bias discussed in this chapter is the tendency to favor our own group over others. We tend to believe that our group, whether it's based on nationality, religion, profession, or any other category, is superior. We assume that our side acts out of good intentions, while their side is driven by malice or ignorance. This bias often leads to stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. The solution? Recognizing the context and challenging the automatic categorization of us versus them. The takeaway. This chapter is a reminder that we must think beyond the individual when making judgments. We cannot judge others' actions without understanding the situation they are in. And we must resist the urge to automatically assign behavior to personal traits, instead of recognizing the situational influences at play. Here's what to remember. The fundamental attribution error. We attribute others' actions to their character, ignoring the context. Context is key. Situations, environments, and mental states matter more than we think. Empathy through understanding. Instead of judging, try to understand the situation. We versus they. Biases favor our side and demonize others. Recognize this in yourself. By slowing down, thinking critically, and considering context, we can improve our decisions, our empathy, and our relationships. Chapter 10. Two Selves, the Present and the Remembering Self. What makes us happy? What defines a good life? In this chapter, Kahneman explores the fascinating idea of the two selves we all have, the experiencing self and the remembering self, and how they shape our decisions, our happiness, and our perception of life's quality. The experiencing self versus the remembering self. We often think of ourselves as a single entity, but Kahneman argues that we actually have two selves. The experiencing self. This is the part of us that lives the present moment. It's our awareness of what's happening right now. It is focused on experiences, what we feel, hear, taste, and sense in real time. The remembering self. This self looks back at the past and creates the story of our life. It focuses not on the moment, but on how we remember events. While we think we make decisions based on the experiencing self, Kahneman reveals that it is actually the remembering self that drives most of our choices. The peak-end rule. One of the most fascinating insights from this chapter is the peak-end rule. This rule states that our memory of an experience is primarily shaped by two things. The peak, the most intense point, good or bad. The end, how the experience concludes. It turns out that how we feel during an experience is often less important than how the experience ends. Similarly, the most intense part, the peak, often defines how we remember it. For example, think of a vacation you had. If the first part of the trip was just okay, but the last day was fantastic, you're likely to remember the entire trip as being great. If the trip ended badly, your memory of the whole vacation may be tainted by that last day, even if the rest of the vacation was enjoyable. This has profound implications for how we evaluate experiences and make future choices. We tend to underestimate the role of the end in shaping our memories and decisions. the focusing illusion. Kahneman introduces the focusing illusion, which refers to how we tend to overestimate the importance of specific factors when evaluating our happiness or life satisfaction. For example, we may think that having more money, a better job, or a different house will dramatically improve our happiness. But when we focus on those aspects, we ignore all the other factors, like relationships, health, and daily experiences, that actually contribute more to our well-being. This illusion distorts our judgment, leading us to chase after the wrong things in search of happiness. The well-being question. When we ask people what would make them happy, they often give answers based on what they think will improve their experiencing self, things like pleasure, comfort, or excitement. But in reality, these experiences don't always align with what contributes most to the remembering self's sense of life satisfaction. Studies have shown that what people remember as contributing to their well-being often involves meaningful experiences, relationships, accomplishments, personal growth, more than fleeting pleasures or material gains. This is why, when people are asked about their happiness, they may provide a different answer than when they reflect on their life satisfaction or overall sense of fulfillment. The duration neglect. Another surprising finding from Kahneman's research is duration neglect, the tendency for us to disregard the length of an experience when judging its overall quality. For instance, if a vacation lasts 2 weeks but ends with a spectacular last day, we'll remember it as a fantastic trip. But the fact that the other 13 days were mediocre doesn't affect our overall evaluation much. This explains why people might remember a good meal at a restaurant, even if it had a few less than perfect moments. They focus on the peak experience and the end rather than the entire duration. The impact on decision-making. Kahneman explains that our remembering self plays a huge role in decision-making because it's the self we listen to when recalling experiences and planning future ones. If you've had a great vacation in the past, you may decide to visit the same place again based on how you remember it, not how you felt at the time. Similarly, when making long-term decisions, we tend to focus on the memories of past events rather than the real-time experience, which can lead to flawed decisions. Implications for happiness. What does this mean for how we pursue happiness? We should prioritize experiences that bring long-term fulfillment rather than seeking fleeting pleasures. It's the overall story we tell ourselves about our life that shapes our satisfaction, not just isolated moments of joy or discomfort. Understanding the remembering self can help us make better decisions about how we invest our time, money, and energy in ways that will lead to lasting happiness. The takeaway. We have two selves: the experiencing self, living in the moment, and the remembering self, reflecting on the past. The remembering self is the one that shapes our decisions and overall happiness. The peak-end rule shows that we often judge experiences based on the most intense moment and how they end, not on the entire experience. Duration neglect and the focusing illusion distort how we evaluate experiences. To improve our happiness, we must focus on experiences that will contribute to a meaningful and fulfilling story. Chapter 11. The Two Systems in Action: How We Make Choices. In this chapter, Kahneman takes a deep dive into how System 1 and System 2 interact when making decisions, and how cognitive biases affect the choices we make. The way we make decisions, large or small, is often influenced by these two systems, but it's not always clear how they work together, or against each other. The role of System 1 in decision-making. System 1, our fast-thinking system, operates automatically and effortlessly. It's designed to make quick decisions without conscious thought. Think about your ability to recognize faces, read simple sentences, or react to a familiar situation. It's all System 1 at work. While this system is often effective in everyday situations, it has some serious flaws when it comes to more complex decision-making, It tends to rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts that help us navigate the world quickly, but often lead to biases and errors. For example, if you hear that a product is highly rated by many people, you're more likely to buy it, simply because you trust the opinions of others. This is a heuristic, a shortcut to make decisions without thinking too much about the actual quality or value of the product. System 2. The rational thinker. On the other hand, System 2 is our slow, deliberate thinking system. It's the one we use when solving complex problems, doing math, or reflecting on difficult choices. Unlike System 1, System 2 requires conscious effort, time, and energy. While System 2 is more accurate in decision-making, it also comes with its own set of challenges. It requires mental resources, and often, when we're tired or distracted, we default to System 1 for convenience. This is where cognitive biases can take over, leading to decisions that don't align with our best interests. The interplay between Systems 1 and 2. These two systems aren't separate entities. They work together to guide our decision-making. System 1 is responsible for quickly generating suggestions for actions based on intuition and pattern recognition, while System 2 evaluates those suggestions, makes decisions, and oversees more complex reasoning. However, System 2 doesn't always take the lead. In many cases, we rely on System 1 without realizing it, even for decisions that require more careful thinking. Kahneman argues that overconfidence in our own abilities often leads us to think we are using System 2, when in fact we're still guided by the more automatic processes of System 1. For example, if you're presented with an unfamiliar problem but have a gut feeling about the answer, you may choose to act quickly based on intuition rather than engage in a slow and careful analysis. Cognitive biases. How they shape our choices. Kahneman delves into the role of cognitive biases that affect decision-making. These biases arise when System 1 takes over, often without the intervention of System 2, to evaluate the situation rationally. Some common biases include anchoring. We are often influenced by an initial piece of information, the anchor, when making decisions, even if it's irrelevant. For example, if you see a shirt priced at $100, you may think a $50 shirt is a great deal, even if it's overpriced compared to similar options. Availability heuristic. We tend to overestimate the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. If you've recently heard about airplane crashes, you might become more fearful of flying, even though statistically, it's much safer than driving. Overconfidence bias. People often believe they know more than they actually do, or overestimate their ability to predict outcomes, leading to poor decisions. This is especially true in high-stakes situations, where people fail to assess risks realistically. Loss aversion. We tend to fear losses more than we value gains. For instance, losing $100 feels more painful than winning. $100 feels pleasurable. This bias often leads to decision-making that is overly cautious or resistant to change, even when the potential for gain is much higher. The role of emotions in decision-making. While System 2 is supposed to be rational and logical, it is often influenced by emotions. Emotions are a natural part of decision-making, but they can also cloud our judgment. When we make decisions in a heightened emotional state, we may rely too heavily on System 1, making snap judgments without considering all the information. For example, when making purchases during a sale, the excitement of the discount can lead us to make impulsive decisions we might regret later. The biases of expert decision-making. Kahneman also discusses how experts are not immune to biases. Even professionals, like doctors, lawyers, and financial analysts, are influenced by System 1 biases, despite their years of training and experience. Experts may develop a sense of intuition in their field, but this intuition is often shaped by the same cognitive shortcuts that affect the rest of us. One of the most dangerous biases is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs, rather than considering evidence that may contradict them. For experts, this bias can be particularly harmful, as it may lead them to overlook critical information or make decisions based on incomplete or flawed data. The importance of awareness and reflection. One of the key takeaways from this chapter is the importance of self-awareness. By understanding how System 1 and System 2 work, and being aware of their interactions, we can begin to make better decisions. To counteract the biases of System 1, it's important to engage System 2 in situations where careful thought and evaluation are needed. This can be as simple as pausing before making a decision, asking for more information, or considering alternative viewpoints. The takeaway: System 1 is fast, automatic, and intuitive, but can lead to biased decisions. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and rational, but requires more effort and resources. Cognitive biases, like anchoring, availability, and overconfidence, often guide our decisions, even when we think we are being rational. Emotions and intuition play a larger role in decision-making than we realize. Experts are not immune to biases and often rely on intuition, which can lead to errors. To make better decisions, we must be aware of the biases that affect our thinking and make a conscious effort to engage System 2 when necessary. Chapter 12. Expert Intuition. When can we trust it? In this chapter, Kahneman delves deeper into the world of expert intuition. We often look to experts for guidance because we believe their years of experience make them more likely to make accurate decisions. However, Kahneman reveals that expert intuition is not always as reliable as we think, and understanding when to trust it can be the key to making better decisions. What is expert intuition? Expert intuition is the ability to make fast, accurate judgments based on years of experience and accumulated knowledge in a specific field. Experts often make decisions instinctively or with minimal conscious effort, relying on patterns they have recognized over time. For example, a firefighter might instinctively sense the structure of a building is about to collapse, even without complete evidence. A chess player might see the winning move in a game almost instantly. These judgments feel natural to the expert, and they often occur without thinking about how they arrived at the decision. But is this intuition always reliable? The conditions for reliable expert intuition. Kahneman argues that expert intuition can only be trusted in specific conditions. Regular, predictable environments. Intuition works best when the environment is stable and can be learned through consistent patterns. A chessboard, for example, is predictable, with clear rules and limited variables. Experts can develop an intuition for recognizing patterns in these kinds of situations. Opportunities for feedback. Experts need to receive continuous feedback to improve their intuition. In fields where outcomes are visible and immediate, like sports or games, experts can adjust their strategies based on feedback. The faster and more precise the feedback, the better the expert can hone their intuitive abilities. Deliberate practice. Just because someone has experience doesn't mean their intuition is reliable. Expertise is developed over time through deliberate practice. Experts need to work on their skills, actively seeking challenges and feedback to improve their judgment. Without these conditions, even experts can be prone to error, as System 1, which operates automatically and quickly, might lead them to make incorrect judgments based on insufficient or irrelevant information. The dangers of overconfidence. One of the most dangerous aspects of expert intuition is the overconfidence that often accompanies it. Kahneman explains that experts, like all of us, tend to overestimate their abilities, particularly when they are in familiar environments or when they have accumulated years of experience. This overconfidence bias can lead to flawed decision-making, especially in complex or uncertain situations. When experts believe they just know the answer, they might overlook critical information, ignore alternative viewpoints, or fail to engage their system two, the slower, more rational thinking system. For example, a doctor might misdiagnose a patient because they rely on their intuition and overlook critical signs. A stockbroker might ignore emerging trends or signs of a market shift, relying on their gut feeling instead of analyzing the data thoroughly. When expert intuition fails, Kahneman highlights several situations where expert intuition can fail, particularly when experts rely on their gut feelings without questioning them. Some key reasons for failure include unpredictable environments. Intuition works well when the environment is stable and predictable. However, in environments that are constantly changing or highly complex, such as financial markets or medical diagnoses in complex cases, expert intuition may be less reliable. Unconscious biases. Experts, like everyone else, are not immune to cognitive biases. Their decisions can be influenced by biases like anchoring, confirmation bias, and overconfidence, which can distort their intuitive judgment. Lack of feedback. In many fields, it is difficult to receive immediate and clear feedback. This means experts may not realize they're making mistakes, or they may not learn from their errors as quickly as they would in more controlled environments. Case study: the predictive power of expert intuition. Despite the potential for failure, Kahneman shares examples of cases where expert intuition has proven to be reliable. For instance, in fields like chess, music, or airline piloting, experts often make quick, accurate judgments based on years of practice and feedback. These environments are predictable and well-structured, allowing experts to hone their intuition. In fact, the best experts are those who combine intuition with rational analysis. They can quickly spot patterns, but they also take time to verify their judgments through deliberate thought processes, utilizing the power of System 2. The role of luck in expert decision-making. Kahneman emphasizes the role of luck in expert decision-making. Even experts can be wrong, and sometimes luck plays a significant role in the outcomes of their decisions. For example, a successful investor might have made a great decision, but luck played a part in the market conditions. A doctor might have treated a patient correctly, but the patient's recovery could be partially due to luck, not just expertise. The tendency to attribute success to skill and failure to luck can reinforce overconfidence in expert intuition, leading to an inflated sense of control over outcomes. Improving decision-making. Kahneman offers several strategies to improve expert decision-making. Questioning intuition. Experts should practice critical thinking and self-reflection, especially in unfamiliar or high-stakes situations. They should resist the urge to rely solely on intuition and engage System 2 to analyze their choices more carefully. Seeking feedback. Experts should actively seek feedback from others and learn from both successes and failures. This constant feedback loop is essential for improving decision-making over time. Embracing uncertainty. Experts should acknowledge the limits of their intuition and be willing to admit when they don't know something. This humility can help them avoid overconfidence and open up space for rational analysis. The takeaway. Expert intuition can be highly effective in predictable environments with constant feedback and deliberate practice. Overconfidence is a major pitfall of expert intuition, often leading to errors. Cognitive biases and lack of feedback can distort expert judgment. Luck plays a significant role in decision-making, and experts must be aware of this. To improve decision-making, Experts should question their intuition, actively seek feedback, and embrace uncertainty. Chapter 13. The Outside View. In this chapter, Kahneman introduces the concept of the outside view, a method of judgment that involves looking at the broader picture rather than focusing on specific details. Kahneman explains that this approach can help overcome biases and lead to more accurate predictions, especially in situations where we tend to be overconfident. The planning fallacy. Kahneman starts by discussing a common cognitive bias known as the planning fallacy. This bias occurs when people underestimate how much time, effort, and resources a task will require. Despite their experience, people often make overly optimistic forecasts about the future, believing that their plans will unfold perfectly. For example, a construction project might be expected to be completed in a year, but it ends up taking much longer. A student might predict they will finish their thesis in 2 months, but end up needing much more time. The planning fallacy arises from an over-reliance on inside views, the belief that the specific circumstances of a situation are unique and that one's detailed plans are accurate. This causes individuals to ignore past data and historical patterns that could offer a more realistic view of how things typically unfold. The inside view versus the outside view. Kahneman contrasts the inside view with the outside view. The inside view focuses on the specific details of a current situation, including one's own plans, beliefs, and personal experiences. It leads to overly optimistic predictions, as we tend to think our situation is unique and will proceed smoothly. The outside view, on the other hand, involves taking a broader perspective. Instead of focusing on the specific details of a task, we look at the base rate, how similar tasks have turned out in the past. For example, instead of focusing on a project's specific timelines and plans, the outside view would consider how long similar projects have taken historically. Instead of focusing on how well a person has prepared for an exam, the outside view would look at the general success rate of students who have studied similarly. By adopting the outside view, you take into account the actual outcomes of similar situations, helping you make predictions that are less influenced by optimism and bias. How the outside view works. Kahneman explains that the outside view works by averaging the outcomes of similar situations. It's about looking at base rates and using statistical information from the past to make predictions. For example, if you're planning to write a book, instead of estimating how long it will take based on your unique situation, the outside view would suggest looking at how long it has taken other people to write similar books. If you're planning a wedding, instead of focusing on your specific plans, the outside view would consider how long weddings typically take to organize and the usual costs involved. By focusing on these averages, the outside view helps avoid the pitfalls of overconfidence that come with focusing solely on the inside view. The outside view in action. Kahneman provides several real-world examples where the outside view has proven to be more accurate than the inside view. The Boston Harbor Project. One of the most famous cases of the planning fallacy is the Boston Harbor Project, which was initially projected to cost $2 million. However, after reviewing similar projects, the outside view revealed that similar projects had typically cost much more and had taken longer to complete. By applying the outside view, planners would have made more realistic predictions and avoided underestimating the costs. The London Underground. Kahneman also discusses the London Underground's expansion project, which was plagued by delays and cost overruns. The project was expected to take 5 years, but it ended up taking more than a decade. If the planners had used the outside view, they would have seen that similar projects had often been delayed and had required more resources. In both cases, the planners relied too heavily on inside views, their own forecasts and detailed plans, leading to overly optimistic predictions. If they had taken an outside view, they could have made more accurate predictions about the costs and timelines of the projects. The benefits of the outside view. Kahneman emphasizes the benefits of using the outside view. Realistic predictions. By considering base rates and historical data, the outside view offers a more accurate way to predict outcomes. Reduced overconfidence. The outside view helps reduce the planning fallacy and prevents you from overestimating your ability to predict the future. Better decision-making. Using the outside view can help you make more informed decisions by considering how similar situations have turned out in the past. For example, if you're planning to launch a new business, using the outside view could help you take into account the failure rates of new businesses, rather than focusing only on your own optimism about your unique idea. Applying the outside view in everyday life. Kahneman encourages readers to apply the outside view in their own lives. Whenever making predictions, ask yourself questions like, what do similar situations typically look like? What does the historical data tell me about the outcome? What do base rates suggest about the likelihood of success or failure? For instance, if you're planning a vacation, instead of focusing on the specific details of your trip, for example, your own preferences and plans, you might want to look at how often vacations end up getting canceled, or how long people typically spend at each destination. This outside view can provide a more realistic assessment of the situation. Overcoming the inside view bias. Kahneman provides several strategies for overcoming the bias of the inside view. Use base rates. Always look at how similar situations have turned out in the past. Consult experts. Experts can often provide outside views, especially if they have experience with similar situations. Break the problem into smaller parts. When faced with a complex task, break it down into smaller, more manageable parts. Then apply the outside view to each of those parts. By adopting these strategies, you can avoid the overconfidence and mistakes that come with relying solely on the inside view. The takeaway. The inside view focuses on specific details and often leads to overoptimism and the planning fallacy. The outside view helps you make more accurate predictions by considering base rates and historical data from similar situations. The outside view is especially useful in predicting the time, cost, and likelihood of success of complex projects. To make better predictions, always ask yourself, what do similar situations look like? And consult historical data. Chapter 14. Tom W.'s Specialty, the Law of Small Numbers. In this chapter, Kahneman delves into the law of small numbers, a cognitive bias that leads people to make inaccurate conclusions based on small samples of data. Kahneman explains that humans often fall prey to the belief that a small sample is just as representative of a population as a large one. This misjudgment can lead to errors in reasoning and poor decision-making. The law of small numbers. Kahneman introduces the concept of the law of small numbers by examining how people interpret small sample sizes. When it comes to statistical analysis, the size of the sample is crucial. Large samples tend to produce more accurate and reliable results, while small samples can be heavily influenced by random variability and outliers. However, Kahneman argues that people often make the mistake of assuming that small samples are just as reliable as larger ones. This tendency leads to overconfidence in the conclusions we draw from limited data. For instance, imagine a small town where only a few people are surveyed about their preferences. Even though the sample size is small, people tend to believe that the results are a solid reflection of the entire population's behavior. The fallacy of small samples. One of the most significant errors in reasoning that arises from the law of small numbers is the belief that small samples are representative of the population. Kahneman explains that when people encounter small sample sizes, they often overestimate the degree to which those samples reflect broader trends. For example, Tom W.'s Specialty. Kahneman shares an example of a fictional person, Tom W., who is believed to be an expert based on a small number of performances. This is an example of how people overestimate the significance of small data sets and draw conclusions that might not be true. Medical studies. Small medical studies that show a high effectiveness for a treatment can lead to overconfidence in the treatment's effectiveness. People often ignore that the sample size might be too small to accurately reflect the treatment's true success rate. Kahneman illustrates this concept with the example of a casino. If a player has a winning streak in a game of chance, the small number of wins may lead them to believe they are particularly skilled, ignoring the role of randomness. In reality, such streaks are often simply statistical anomalies in a small sample. The impact of small samples in real life. Kahneman discusses the widespread impact of the law of small numbers on various aspects of life. In business, small businesses that experience success early on may misinterpret this as a sign of long-term profitability, failing to account for the role of random chance in their early successes. In medicine, small-scale studies of a new drug might lead to overconfidence in its effectiveness, while larger, more rigorous studies might reveal that the results were due to chance or other variables. In sports, athletes and coaches may become overconfident after a few successful performances, disregarding the possibility that their success could have been influenced by chance rather than skill. Kahneman explains that when we see a small sample, we tend to inflate its significance, assuming it is more representative than it actually is. This can lead to poor judgments and decisions based on limited information. The availability heuristic and small samples. The availability heuristic is another cognitive bias that interacts with the law of small numbers. This heuristic leads people to judge the probability of an event based on how easily examples come to mind. When a small sample of data is easily available to us, we tend to believe that it is more representative and reliable than it actually is. For example, personal experiences. If someone has a few good experiences with a particular product or service, they might overestimate how well it performs for everyone based on the small sample of their own experience. News stories. The media often focuses on rare high-profile events, which can lead people to overestimate the frequency or likelihood of such events occurring in their own lives. A few sensational news stories may skew people's perceptions of how often these events happen. The availability heuristic causes people to rely on easily accessible data, such as vivid memories or recent experiences, which are often not representative of broader trends. Misunderstanding statistical significance. Kahneman highlights the common mistake people make in interpreting statistical significance. The law of small numbers leads individuals to treat small samples as if they have the same power as large samples, which can result in overestimating the reliability of statistical findings. P-hacking. In research, the law of small numbers can lead to practices like p-hacking, where researchers manipulate data to find statistically significant results in small samples, even though those results might be misleading or due to chance. Lottery. People often mistakenly believe that a small lucky win in a lottery proves a pattern, leading them to continue playing under the false assumption that they are due for another win. This is a direct consequence of interpreting small sample sizes as statistically meaningful. Kahneman emphasizes that while small samples can provide some insight, they should not be relied upon to make sweeping conclusions. Larger sample sizes are necessary for obtaining reliable data that reflects the true nature of a population. The role of statistical thinking. To overcome the bias introduced by the law of small numbers, Kahneman advises that we engage in statistical thinking. This involves understanding that small samples are prone to random fluctuations and should not be treated as definitive evidence of a larger trend. Statistical thinking encourages the use of larger sample sizes. The more data you have, the more reliable your conclusions are likely to be. The awareness of variability. It's important to recognize that, even with large samples, there will always be variability, and conclusions should be drawn with this in mind. Critical evaluation of data. When interpreting data, it's crucial to consider whether the sample size is large enough to provide reliable conclusions, or if it might be influenced by chance. By understanding the limitations of small samples, we can make better decisions and avoid the errors that come from the law of small numbers. The takeaway. The law of small numbers causes people to overestimate the significance of small sample sizes, leading to misjudgments and poor decision-making. Small samples often do not represent the broader population accurately, and statistical thinking is necessary to interpret them properly. To avoid errors, it's important to consider larger sample sizes and recognize the role of random variability in data analysis. Overconfidence in small data sets can lead to problems in areas like business, medicine, sports, and even personal decisions. Chapter 15. Answering an easier question. In this chapter, Kahneman explores how people often substitute a difficult question with an easier one when making decisions. This substitution process is a key feature of the heuristics we rely on and is a central theme in understanding the cognitive biases that influence our judgments and choices. The substitution process. Kahneman explains that when people are faced with a difficult question, one that requires careful thought or complex reasoning, they often unconsciously replace it with a simpler question. This simpler question is usually one that is easier to answer, but it may not provide the information needed to answer the original question accurately. And, for example, the question, how happy are you with your life in general? The substituted question, how happy are you with your life today? In this case, people may answer based on their current mood, which is a much easier question to answer than the more complex one about their overall happiness. The law of least effort. This tendency to simplify complex questions is part of a broader principle called the law of least effort. People are generally motivated to conserve mental energy and avoid cognitive effort. When faced with a difficult question, the brain seeks the path of least resistance, often leading us to replace the difficult question with one that requires less cognitive load. The law of least effort explains why we tend to simplify our thinking and rely on shortcuts or heuristics. While this can make decision-making more efficient in some cases, it often leads to biased judgments or errors, as we may overlook important factors or miss nuances in the original question. The effect heuristic. One key way people substitute difficult questions is by using their affective reactions, their emotional responses, as a proxy for more complicated cognitive processes. Kahneman calls this the affect heuristic, where people make decisions based on how they feel in the moment, rather than engaging in a deeper analysis of the facts. For instance, affect and risk. When asked whether a certain activity like skydiving or smoking is risky, people might substitute the difficult question of assessing the actual risk with a simpler one. How does this activity make me feel? If an activity makes them feel scared or excited, they may associate it with higher or lower risk, even if the actual statistics suggest otherwise. The affect heuristic helps explain why people tend to overestimate the danger of certain activities based on their emotional reactions and underestimate others that may feel less intimidating but pose greater risks. The substitution in everyday life. Kahneman illustrates how substitution works in various areas of life. Politics. Voters often substitute difficult questions about political policies with simpler questions about a candidate's appearance, personality, or likability. This emotional evaluation can heavily influence political decisions, even when voters are not aware of it. Consumer choices. When shopping, people may substitute the complex question of, what is the best product for my needs, with the simpler question of, Which product looks most appealing to me right now? This can lead to impulsive buying decisions based on superficial factors like packaging or branding, rather than careful consideration of the product's quality or suitability. Personal decisions. When deciding on a partner, people may substitute questions about long-term compatibility with simpler questions about attractiveness, which can lead to decisions based on short-term emotions rather than thoughtful deliberation. The substitution of confidence for accuracy. Another common substitution is when people use their confidence in an answer as a measure of its accuracy. This is a particularly dangerous bias because confident answers often feel more valid, even if they are wrong. Overconfidence bias. People often feel more confident about their answers when they don't have sufficient information, leading them to be more certain of their judgments, even when they're incorrect. This can be seen in areas such as financial investing, where investors may feel confident in their predictions despite lacking data or understanding of the full picture. Intuitive judgments. Kahneman discusses how people often substitute intuition for expertise. A person might have a strong feeling that an answer is correct, but this feeling can be unreliable. The overconfidence in these intuitive judgments often leads to errors, especially when the task at hand requires deliberate, analytical thinking. The role of heuristics in substitution. Substitution is closely tied to the use of heuristics, mental shortcuts that allow people to make quick judgments. Heuristics are effective because they save time and cognitive energy, but they can also lead to systematic biases. Availability heuristic. When people are asked a question that is difficult to answer, they may substitute it with an easier question, such as, "How easily can I think of examples?" This is the availability heuristic at work. If someone can quickly recall examples of something, they may overestimate its frequency or importance. Representativeness. Heuristic. Another example is when people use the representativeness heuristic, where they substitute a question about the likelihood of an event with a question about how representative it is of a known category. This can lead people to judge the probability of events based on superficial characteristics rather than deeper statistical analysis. The impact of substitution on judgment. Kahneman emphasizes that substitution can have a profound impact on the accuracy of our judgments. When we unknowingly substitute easier questions, we can end up with answers that are biased, inaccurate, or misleading. Personal finances. In financial decision-making, for example, people may substitute the complex question of, "What is the best investment strategy for my long-term goals?" with the simpler question, "What investment is performing well right now?" This can lead to poor financial decisions based on short-term gains rather than long-term planning. Medical decisions. In healthcare, people might substitute the difficult question of, "What are the long-term effects of this treatment?" with the simpler question of, "How do I feel about this treatment right now?" Emotional reactions may outweigh rational analysis, potentially leading to suboptimal choices. The solution to substitution. Kahneman suggests that we can improve our decision-making by recognizing when substitution occurs and actively engaging in critical thinking. By slowing down and reflecting on our judgments, we can make more accurate assessments and avoid relying on emotional responses or intuitive shortcuts. Ask the right question. One way to avoid substitution is to explicitly reframe the original, difficult question. Instead of substituting it with an easier question, consciously ask yourself, "Am I answering the question that was asked, or am I focusing on a simpler, less relevant issue?" Seek diverse perspectives. Another strategy is to seek outside opinions or expert advice, especially when the question at hand is complex or requires specialized knowledge. Practice reflection. Kahneman encourages individuals to practice reflective thinking, allowing more time for deliberation before making important decisions. This can help counteract the urge to substitute difficult questions with easier, biased ones. The takeaway. Substitution occurs when we replace a difficult question with an easier one that we feel more confident answering. This process can lead to biased or incorrect judgments. The law of least effort explains why we are motivated to take shortcuts when faced with complex questions. Heuristics, such as the availability and representativeness heuristics, often play a role in substitution, leading to decisions based on emotional responses or superficial characteristics. To improve our judgments, we must recognize when substitution occurs and consciously engage in more thoughtful, reflective decision-making. Conclusion. In this final chapter, Kahneman summarizes the major themes and insights from Thinking, Fast and Slow. He reflects on the two systems of thinking, their roles in decision-making, and how understanding these systems can lead to better choices and improved thinking processes in our daily lives. The two systems revisited. Throughout the book, Kahneman has presented the idea that our minds operate using two distinct modes of thinking. System 1, fast, automatic and intuitive, and System 2, slow, deliberate, and logical. These systems work in tandem, with System 1 handling everyday tasks and rapid decisions, and System 2 stepping in for more complex, conscious, and analytical thinking. While System 1 is efficient and quick, it is also prone to errors and biases. In contrast, System 2 is more accurate but requires more mental effort. Kahneman concludes that a key takeaway is the need to recognize when our System 1 thinking is leading us astray, and when we should engage System 2 to ensure more thoughtful and rational decisions. The biases that shape us. Kahneman emphasizes the wide range of cognitive biases that influence our judgments and decisions. These biases often occur because we rely on heuristics or mental shortcuts to simplify complex problems. While heuristics can be useful for making quick decisions, they can also lead us to systematically overestimate risks, fall prey to overconfidence, and make poor choices based on emotions or superficial information. For example, the anchoring effect, where our judgments are influenced by an initial reference point, or the availability heuristic, where we base decisions on easily recalled examples, are just a few of the biases that can distort our thinking. By recognizing these biases, Kahneman suggests that we can take steps to reduce their impact on our decision-making. The power of awareness. One of the central messages of the book is that awareness is the first step toward overcoming cognitive biases. By understanding how our minds work and how easily we can be led astray by intuition or emotion, we can become more mindful in our decision-making processes. This awareness allows us to question our initial impulses and make more informed, rational choices. Kahneman also encourages readers to adopt a critical mindset. When making important decisions, particularly in areas like finances, health, or relationships, it's crucial to slow down and engage System 2 thinking. The more we practice this, the better we become at avoiding common pitfalls like overconfidence, confirmation bias, and the halo effect. Implications for decision-making. Kahneman argues that the insights from this book have wide-ranging implications for decision-making in many areas of life, whether in business, politics, healthcare, or personal relationships. The way we think shapes the choices we make. Leaders, policymakers, and individuals alike can benefit from being aware of how cognitive biases influence their decisions. In business, business leaders can use the knowledge of biases to improve decision-making processes in their organizations. By recognizing the biases that influence consumer behavior, for example, marketers can design more effective advertising strategies. Managers can also apply these insights to make better personnel decisions, improving hiring and leadership effectiveness. In politics, Kahneman suggests that political leaders could make more informed decisions by understanding how voters are influenced by emotional appeals, superficial impressions, or biased information. Similarly, voters can benefit from being more aware of their biases when evaluating political candidates and policies. In healthcare, medical professionals can improve diagnosis and treatment decisions by recognizing the influence of biases in their assessments. For instance, doctors may be susceptible to availability bias by overestimating the likelihood of conditions they've recently seen in patients rather than using statistical probability. In personal relationships, on a personal level, understanding the biases that influence our choices can help us build better relationships, avoid misunderstandings, and make more thoughtful decisions in our interactions with others. Practical applications. Tools for better thinking. Kahneman concludes the book with practical suggestions for improving our thinking. He outlines several techniques that can help us counteract the biases and errors that often arise from relying too heavily on System 1 thinking. Slow down. When faced with an important decision, take time to engage System 2. Think carefully about the problem, ask questions, and consider alternative perspectives before making a decision. Consider the opposite. To avoid confirmation bias, deliberately search for information that contradicts your beliefs or initial impressions. This will help you avoid overconfidence and broaden your understanding of the issue at hand. Seek outside opinions. Getting feedback from others, particularly experts or people with different perspectives, can help you see things more objectively and reduce the influence of your own biases. Use decision aids. Kahneman suggests using decision aids, such as checklists or algorithms, to guide complex decisions. These tools help reduce the reliance on intuition and force us to follow a structured, logical process. Embrace uncertainty. Finally, Kahneman advises us to be comfortable with uncertainty and to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge. By recognizing that we don't have all the answers, we can approach decisions with greater humility and make more thoughtful, informed choices. The role of judgment and rationality. At the heart of Kahneman's work is the idea that judgment and rationality are not as straightforward as we might believe. While humans are capable of great intellectual feats, our decision-making processes are deeply flawed by biases and heuristics. The key is to understand these flaws and take steps to mitigate their impact. Kahneman's work serves as a reminder that rationality is not about eliminating emotion or intuition, but rather about balancing them with careful, deliberate thinking. The goal is not to make perfect decisions, but to improve the quality of our thinking and recognize when we're being influenced by biases that lead us astray. Conclusion: thinking better. Ultimately, thinking fast and slow is about becoming better thinkers. Kahneman's work teaches us that while our minds are prone to error, we have the capacity to improve our decision-making by understanding the systems of thinking at play and recognizing when we are falling into cognitive traps. By consciously engaging System 2, using critical thinking, and learning to overcome biases, we can become more effective decision-makers in all aspects of our lives. In a world filled with complexity and uncertainty, the ability to think more clearly and rationally is one of the most valuable skills we can develop.